we're really delighted to do this story today, which is a visual story. I don't know, Paul Bulkley is the architect behind it. So if you want to share your screen at any time, Paul, with pictures of this amazing thing, that would be great. But the three guests that we have with us, delighted to welcome Richard Gamble, who's the CEO of the Eternal Wall of Answered Prayer. The architect behind it, Paul Bulkley, if that's how you pronounce your name, Paul, from Snug Architects. You're based in Lymington in the New Forest on the south coast. And Michelle Heritage, who is the head of Answer Prayer, which I think is a fabulous title. And we'll find out more about what you do, Michelle, in a moment. But first of all, if I could turn to you, Richard, and I'm imagining that everyone on this call will know what the Wall of Answered Prayer is, and maybe they've seen pictures of this. We've got a story on our website. It was all over the Sunday Times, in various local publications as well. So could I just ask you a very basic question? Just describe what this project is, first of all.
Okay, well, it's thank you. It's an architectural sculpture. It's a piece of public art, and it is a Mobius strip, a giant infinity loop, which is, I think, about 80 meters wide, and then its arch loops up into the skyline about 50 meters high. But it's made up of 1 million bricks, and every single brick will have on it a story of answered prayer, a story of hope. And when visitors come, they'll be able to pick up the phone, point their phone at a brick, and their phone will light up and tell them the story of answered prayer that brick represents. For us, this is all about making hope visible and sharing with the country stories of God at work.
So thank you. So Paul, I don't know if you do have a picture in the background. That we're very happy for you just to let us know when you've got one in the background you might be able to share, would be great. But can I ask you the next question, Richard? Where will this be? I hear it's on the M6 somewhere near the junction with the M42, but where exactly will it be? How high up?
So this will be built between the M6 and the M42 at Coleshill, Birmingham. The HS2 will go past it about 100 metres away, and it's also in the flight path of Birmingham Airport. So overall, 500,000 journeys will see this every week. 500,000 journeys will go past it every week, rather. And it's been an incredible story, really, how we got the land. We prayed, and God linked us up through an incredible sort of list of circumstances, and you can go onto our YouTube channel and watch the Heavenly Land video, and that'll tell you the full story. But we ended up being given a piece of land worth 1.7 million, and it is just perfect in its siting to have as high visibility as possible.
Can you tell me how the idea originated? When did you get the idea, and how?
Yeah, I got the idea 16 years ago, would you believe? I was had a bit more hair and not so much grey stuff then. But I was at a stage where I just felt God, and I know this may sound odd to some people, but I just felt God tell me to carry a cross around Leicestershire, and I wanted people to think about Jesus during the Easter period. And as I was walking around, I think about 250,000 people saw it, and I started praying and saying, God, what do you want me to do next? And I felt like God spoke to me. Difficult to describe, sort of a vision, idea of building a wall by the side of a motorway of 1 million bricks, where every brick represents an answered prayer. And then for me, it was 10 years of just thinking that through and working out what to do with that. I mean, somebody asked me recently, are you an artist? And I'm like, no, I'm just a bloke with an idea. You know, I don't have all the capabilities to do this. But 6 years ago, I felt God say, right, it's time to get going on this. And so I gave up my other activities, and we've been focusing on it and building a team and running a Reba competition and getting to this incredible stage where we're thrilled to be able to tell everybody that we have planning permission and that this now is going to happen. And
So tell us a bit more about yourself and what you were doing at
yeah,
that moment. I read in your CV that you had been chaplain to Leicester City Football Club at one point. Was that around
that's
the
right.
same time that you had the vision?
It was just after that. I always say, I was at Leicester City, but only when they were rubbish. Not when they started playing well. But I was running a software business at the time, and I was planting a church in the Midlands. And then I was just starting, I think, when God gave me that vision to become chaplain of Leicester City.
And
then,
are you in any particular denomination?
I'm part of a church called Chroma Church. So I think you'd sort of class that as a sort of independent charismatic. I think it's really, really important, though, that what we're doing, it's not my project. For me, this is the church to get involved, and we mustn't go down one theology approach with this. For me, the church agrees in prayer, agrees that we should pray, and so we are getting support from the wide spectrum of churches, and I think that's really important that we represent all viewpoints in this country.
And are you also getting support from other faith groups? Do their prayers count?
I've been no. We are pretty unashamed in the sense that this is a Christian landmark. Now, I think there are sensitivities around that for which we need to be wise, and we don't want to. At the end of the day, this is a piece of public art, and the purpose is to provoke a conversation about prayer. And so we wanted to build an architectural sculpture that people would love, and I think Paul and his team have done a fantastic job at that. And when people come, they can look at it and in the gardens take some time to think about whether prayer and faith should be part of their life. We're not giving the answer. Good art should provoke a conversation, but not dictate the answer. And so within the exhibition, what we're going to do is actually share what other faiths believe as well as the Christian faith. So you're giving people other, what do Buddhists believe about prayer, for example? And in that way, we're giving a little bit more of balance view.
So there'll be an exhibition centre and this massive 51 metre high kind of loop overlooking the motorway. How much is all this going to cost and how are you funding it?
So the cost is 9.35 million. And here's the beauty of it. I mean, we will be getting some funding, which we're negotiating at the moment. Now we've got the planning from individuals and trust funds. But we think by May, we will then go to the public and we're looking to crowdfund for around, we think it'll be £4 million. That'll be the gap. To date, 5,000 people have backed this to raise the money to get to this point. What's unique, I believe, about this project is it's not a charity trying to deliver it. I'm hoping it's going to be the nation. I hope it's going to be a people's landmark. So it is crowdsourced. We've had hundreds of volunteers giving their skills and their time to get here. We've had thousands of people donating, and we hope we'll get 1 million people sharing the story.
Right. So just to be clear, you're halfway there with your funding at the moment. You've got 5 million, have you? Secured?
Well, that's all under. Yeah, I'd love to say it's in the bank and looking fantastic, but it's all currently negotiated because a lot of the funders wanted to make sure that we got planning before they sort of went into the detail of the negotiations. But as soon as I've finished doing all my PR, that's what's going to be taking up my time.
So, just tell us a bit about that planning journey that you were on, because this story was splashed in the Sunday Times this last weekend, and that was
Yeah.
because you finally got the Secretary of State's approval for the planning application. How long did that journey take you? What happened on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's been long. Well, it feels long for me. Some people tell me it's quick in the world of planning, but we've had the long process, of course, of finalising the design first of all, because we ran this competition, and then we were delighted last year to award that to Snug Architects, and then we need to sort of pull together the detail of planning, which is a massively complex process. Sorry, we put our planning in January, I think it was. So there's probably about 6 months before that, and then I very much tried to approach it as collaborative. I don't believe that I have all the answers on what this should look like and how it should be. So when we got feedback from the councillors and from different experts, we tried to build that into our plan. And then obviously in, what was it, July, we had the council vote on it unanimously. And then we went to the Secretary of State for approval.
And what were the issues that they were worried about? Because I would have thought building a huge structure like that beside a motorway, you had to convince them.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, for example, one concern was, would it be a distraction? And there's actually an EU paper which talks about the value of landmarks actually improve safe driving. So some people have said, well, why have you made it so big? Well, it needs to be of a certain size to improve safe driving and not be a distraction. We had concerns around traffic to make sure that it didn't impact the local traffic. But I think once we got into the detail, and once the councillors realised that we were actually opening up a green belt space, and we were actually we'll be planting more. I'm sure Paul will explain some of the detail of this, but in the gardens, we're way up on our biodiversity assessment, and we're creating a green space for people to come locally and hopefully nationally that previously would be inaccessible. And I think once the council has got the openness in the way we're trying to do this, they embraced it.
Thank you. Thanks very much for explaining all of that. Can I just turn to Paul now, please, the architect behind this? So Richard has just mentioned that this was a competition really amongst architects. So how did you first hear about this, and why did you apply?
Okay, so the competition was run by the Royal Institute of British Architects, and they run competitions intermittently, and those kind of things are announced in our journal. So it was one of my colleagues actually who spotted it in the journal. I, to be quite frank, avoid architectural competitions normally like the plague. They are very, very high risk, extremely low odds of winning, and involve a huge amount of work. So the bottom line is, when my colleague came over and very cautiously sort of presented, Paul, there's a competition here I think you might be interested in. He was being quite brave actually, because normally I wouldn't look at them, but it really caught my attention. And I think when we do enter competitions is when we think that we can align values with our clients. It's one of those things where you've got to really feel you've got the passion to see it through, basically, and fundamentally to take the risks that are involved in that sort of venture. So when I looked at the brief, I'd never seen such an explicitly strong and clear Christian brief coming out for an architectural competition. And as a committed Christian myself, that really caught my eye. And you don't get many opportunities in a career as an architect to work on something which aspires to be not only nationally significant, but fundamentally a really bold statement by the Christian community on behalf of the nation. So it really caught our attention, and so that triggered me to say, okay, I think we'll look at this, and we then sort of embarked on the process from there.
So you were a part of a small team from your company that got this going. Were there many minds involved with this?
Yeah, so the process, there's 18 of us in the practice, and I'm the founder of the practice. I decided to set an office competition, in-house competition, to basically try and draw out ideas, but more importantly, to try and raise the discussion in the office around prayer. I mean, not unsurprisingly, most of my colleagues aren't Christians at all, and it led to some really interesting conversations, effectively a microcosm of the very conversations that probably are behind this very meeting. It was just a classic example of all the questions that come up around answered prayer, or just, I mean, is prayer a one-way thing, a two-way thing? All the questions around prayer. And that generated a really interesting internal design dialogue, which I think with a good design, you've got to really grapple with the problem, so to speak, and find your way into it. And the nature of the architectural competition was that it was sightless. So it was very much a pure ideas competition, a very conceptual competition, because at that stage there wasn't a piece of land. So we each went off, and I gave them over the weekend to think about it, and if they wanted to say something or contribute something, then to come back on the Monday morning and we would have an in-house presentation. And so I joined them in that process, and I'll talk a bit more in a moment about the actual way my idea came about. But I, as the boss, decided I ought to go last, to make sure that I wasn't distorting the in-house process. And yeah, the guys presented all their ideas, and there was some really interesting ideas emerging there. But what was also apparent was that it's really difficult to design. It's really difficult to design if you don't really get the brief. I mean, that's just a basic of the design process. So I was one of the few people in that process who actually genuinely was a man of prayer, and therefore I actually aligned with the brief. And it became very, very apparent very quickly to the others, as it happened, that it made a huge difference. So when we finally got to my idea and I presented, it was nice, I believe not just because I'm the boss, but there was a universal recognition in the office that this was something different, that captured something of the brief. And because they'd all read the brief over the weekend and they really had got the brief and understood what was being asked, I think they could see it. So that was very affirming, I think, at the outset, to have the team genuinely, and they're not afraid to tell me when they don't agree with me. And they got behind it, which was lovely. And it also captured one or two of the key ideas that were surviving from the dialogue. So through the 15 or so presentations that were made, one or two ideas were coming out as core. And what was nice is that the concept which I then presented to the team captured some of the best of those things, but perhaps brought them together into something that was greater than the sum of the parts. So for me personally, I'd gone away, and blank sheet of paper is always the challenge for an architect. How do you fill the blank sheet of paper? And I did pray about it, and instantaneously the concept for the Mobius strip popped into my head. The detail of that process, which I think is always interesting to unpack, what does the creative process really look like, and what's the answer to prayer really kind of look like, was that I very quickly had in my head 1 million bricks at 66 bricks a square metre. That's 15,000 square metres. That's incredibly large. That's really not very accessible at all. And how can I make that smaller? Well, that's a 7.5 kilometre long wall if it's 2 metres high. That's not very accessible. That's not really a landmark or a monument. Now, all of this is happening in 100th of a second. This is the way design works. And then my brain went to, okay, close it in on itself into a circular form, a circular wall. That creates an accessibility from the centre. All of the surface is now close to the occupant, but it's still hundreds of metres and relatively inaccessible. And it's a bit dull, to be quite frank, and it's not really a landmark. And that's when the inspiration struck to build a little model, cut the card, twist it, turn it, there's the Mobius strip, and then we're off and running. And what's fascinating is that the concept has not changed one iota since the beginning, but we've done 2 years of solid work to get to what you see in front of you. And that's design. That's design for you.
Can everyone see my shared screen? I've tried to share a picture of it. I don't know if you can see it. Hope you're not looking at me, you're looking at the picture.
You want me to, shall I share screen? Because I can take you through probably more of a process just very quickly, the images that I'm describing. Because what you're seeing in front of you is not the actual original design.
Oh, okay. I'll stop sharing. What I really want to know is, how do you get the bricks to stay up in the air on that loop?
I'm not going to tell you. That's the golden jewel of this process. Because actually, one of the things that was most satisfying when we eventually got shortlisted down to the last 5 is the most common social media comment was, "That one's not possible," which we absolutely love. And one of the great mysteries of this thing is behind the scenes, we take very seriously the technical issues. And we're working collaboratively with a really great firm of engineers. So that has really helped us to make sure that we're rigorous as well as conceptually exciting. And that's fundamentally what good architecture is all about. So that side of things is 50% of the process from our perspective, working with the technical team.
Yeah. So we're talking about using ordinary house bricks, or are they specially designed bricks?
To all intents and purposes, they are what you might think of as an ordinary house brick. They are what we in the trade call a brick special, because we want the brick to be appropriately shaped, detailed and designed to be appropriate to this project. But when you're ordering 1 million bricks, a special is just a production run, because you can justify doing something slightly more interesting. But you also need a brick that is of a robust enough finish to be of life, long lasting and able to handle the weathering issues. So it's in the trade a brick special. But fundamentally, when you look at it, it's just a brick.
And you were talking on the website when you were describing it, you said it was an eternal loop without a beginning and an end. I quite like that. You spoke earlier about how you got the idea, and you would explain in a moment. Was it a visionary thing, as Richard has just described? Did it kind of flash at you?
Design is a funny thing. So much happens in 100th of a second, and I mean, I can just quickly, and you basically sketch, but if I just share screen, I'll just show you. I can't show you all the hundreds of models that followed it, but this is obviously where we've ended up. Now, the top left there, that is the model. That is the original model. Now, as you can see, it's nothing like the finished proportions of the final object. What you see in front of you there would be 300 meters across and only about 25 meters high. So a completely different proportion. And the nature of, so what we did was we then created a CGI for the competition, which is the bottom left-hand image. And that was the initial competition stage when there was 133 entries, I think it was, and we were whittled down to 25. And really all we had was that one image to convey our concept, to convey the emotion, to convey the feeling about the scheme. The second stage of the competition, we then had to develop the scheme quite a lot further. And at that point, we then had an actual site. So obviously at that point, things start to become much more specific. And the site wasn't 300 meters wide. The site was only about 100 meters wide. So we had to then adapt the concept. But the one thing that wasn't changing was it's 1 million bricks. And so the surface area is effectively a fixed entity. So we worked around the detailing of that, and that tightened up the proportions, and also we cranked up the height. So we mucked around with Mobius strips. I don't think I've ever spent so much time building models of Mobius strips in my life. I probably have built at least 100 of those card models, and then photographed them from lots of different directions and lots of angles, working with the engineers to work out the structural implications of the different geometry and shapes and forms. And then after the successful competition win, we then had to reorientate the plot, as it happens, because the access road ended up coming from a different direction, and the whole thing turned around. But also Richard wisely wanted to get more of a twist into the arch and get a bit more height into the arch and a bit more drama into the twist of the arch, because the view from the motorway obviously is very critical, and we now had that view and we knew what we were going to get. So Mobius strip as a concept, they're all a Mobius strip and they all are fundamentally the same concept, but there are a whole series of little tweaks, refinements, etc., that were made moving from the initial competition through to the final planning application.
So can I just ask you, what does it feel like as an architect to be delivering something that will stand maybe for centuries as part of the landscape of Britain?
You can't take that sort of thing in. I mean, I don't think anything of it, if I'm honest. I just don't. I just can't. I don't. Yeah, you can't kind of. I mean, that'd be an overwhelming thought, if I'm honest.
So you just don't think it. Okay.
No, I mean,
That's
seriously,
good.
I really don't, because I
Yeah.
just think that would be an overwhelming thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Can I just turn to Michelle, just to ask you a couple of questions, then we'll open the doors to all the journalists who are on the call. So, Michelle, I said earlier, your job title is Head of Answered Prayer, which sounds a bit like a title you might give God, really, isn't it? What do you do exactly?
An interesting title, isn't it? It always makes me think of Bruce Almighty, when all the post-it notes are flying at Bruce as he's trying to take on answering all those prayers. So obviously my job is not to answer prayers. My job is to gather answered prayers from all around the UK and all around the world, actually, and start partnering with other organisations who believe in answered prayers, so that we can access archives but also connect with individuals.
What are the stories that you've been collecting so far?
One of the things that's been interesting is that they're so diverse, actually, because people are praying about situations that are going on in their lives. So we've had a massive range from people praying for provision to people in situations where they've been in danger and they've prayed and then they've found their way to safety, or there's been some kind of intervention which they feel has been from God. There have been amazing stories of healing, really simple everyday answered prayers, like a child struggling to sleep at night because they were afraid, and a mum praying and just asking Jesus to meet that child and communicate in the way that they needed. And then when they woke up in the morning, they just dreamt about an angel covering the house with his shield all night. So, really great. And then we've got an answered prayer from an 82-year-old who lost her hearing aid, and just a brilliant story, which really shows the conversational side of prayer, where she's saying to God, I know I'm 82 years old, can you just tell me where my hearing aid is? And God says, go to the local petrol station. And she has this great little dialogue with God, and ends up going to the local petrol station, and sure enough, someone's handed her hearing aid in there. So just great illustrations of how God answers prayers in the everyday, and then, the outright miraculous.
What about kind of global issues like famine or world peace? Have you had any answered prayers like that?
Sure. So we are trying to gather answered prayers from all around the world, because we want to reflect what is actually going on. And if we're only showing answered prayers from the UK, then we're not necessarily experiencing those same issues. We're not praying necessarily in the same way as the people who are in those situations. So that's part of my job, to connect with organisations that can help us gather those kind of prayers. So they are coming in from all different angles. What we're aiming to do, as Richard said, is to present an overall picture of individual experiences that together can communicate something that people can interact with and make up their own minds, because these are big questions that people want answers to.
And how
maybe
many
Richard can add in on that as well.
How many answered prayers have you received so far, and how big a journey do you have to get to 1 million?
Obviously, it's a big journey, but yeah, the answered prayers are coming in. We've noticed a really fast acceleration since lockdown began, actually. So if you look at the website counter today, it's saying 24,602, I think. But it's a constantly moving picture, because we now have testimonies coming in regularly via the website, but we've also got organisations that have given us access to their archives. And so part of the development is getting volunteers and having a team that is processing archive material. It's great to have access to answered prayers from centuries of British history.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Michelle. Just to say to everyone that all this is being tweeted by Sophie in the background, and she's taken a screenshot of everyone, so I hope that's okay. If it's not, just put something in the chat box. Can we open the doors to everyone who wants to ask questions? And Rosie Dawson has a question.
Hello, everyone. I don't think I'm alone. I'm deeply uncomfortable not just on my own behalf, but I'm sure on many other people's, about this project. This isn't the Angel of the North. This is an unashamedly Christian project in a multi-faith area, which smacks to me of Christian triumphalism. And I think that it needs to be, well, I just wonder how you are going to deal with that level of discomfort that I imagine that you'll receive if you haven't already. I don't know how you decide which prayers go on there and which don't. I mean, that's a theological, and that's a really difficult call. There'll be people praying for all sorts of conflicting things, and maybe some very, very unpalatable things. But the place where it is in the middle of a conurbation, which is not a Christian conurbation. And I'll finish in a minute. But you know, if, as the Guardian says, you're wanting to protect the Christian heritage of the nation, and that's what this is all about, well, we've got 42 or more Anglican cathedrals who do that. I don't have any questions about the merit of the architecture. I'm sure it's lovely. I'm sure I'll enjoy looking at it, but I have deep concerns about the thinking behind it.
Okay, thank you for that. Really appreciate that, because that is a lot of people's questions. Let me take a few of those, because there are a number of questions within that. Firstly, in terms of how we choose our answer prayers, for me, this is a piece of art. So we will do all we can to provide as wide a picture as possible. However, we will not tolerate hate speech. So that there will be nothing there that would cause offence in that respect, because we want to provide something that provides hope and encouragement. In terms of other faiths, it's been really interesting talking to other local faith leaders. They have the opportunity, of course, in the exhibition to talk about what they believe, and they're actually encouraging, because they are pleased that it's putting spirituality on the map. And we live in an increasing secularized society where faith issues often get pushed aside, or people get pushed into one approach of, well, it needs to be multi-faith so that we don't offend anybody. But actually all the faiths want to have the freedom to express their faith how they see fit. And so actually, you know, the other faith leaders, you know, are going to engage with us, which is fantastic. In terms of the heritage of the country, I think one of the things that we are losing is the stories of what God has done. I totally recognise that we have loads of architectural buildings, church buildings, but one of the motivating forces for us is to remember what God has done. And there are many, you know, the King of England has called this nation to pray. Kings of England have called this nation to pray 15 times. We celebrated in 1940 that the churches opened the doors to celebrate God answering prayers during World War II. And that is being, I believe, etched away from our history and secularized. So in terms of protecting the Christian heritage, that's what we're doing. In terms of triumphalism, you know, I don't believe in a God who every time we answer says yes. I don't believe we're saying, hey, God will do this, God will do this, God will do this. I think actually God is more interested in the journey of prayer than the answer itself. And what we're trying to do is provoke that conversation. Not every answered prayer on our eternal wall will be yeses. There will be many where people have said no, and sometimes very painful experiences. And we'll have chaplains on hand to help people with those who are wrestling with, well, why was the answer no? So we're trying to do that whole range. I understand for some people, they're not going to like it, and maybe I can't convince them. But bottom line, we just believe we're doing what God's told us to do.
That's the problem, isn't it? I think that's the problem for me. Thank you very much.
Okay.
There's another point in the chat box here, which is whether I don't know if you've had any backlash against this, Richard, but have people responded to you saying, don't ram Christianity down our throats? Was that one of the arguments that you had to contend with when you were seeking planning permission?
No, not at all. I think then it comes about tone. Because if I'd have built a massive cross or something of that nature, then I think we are doing that. But we're building an architectural sculpture, which I believe is beautiful. People can enjoy that architecture, and if they like it, that's great. But it's up to them. We're in a free country. That's what's beautiful about this nation, is we can freely express what we believe. And if people want to come and they think it's rubbish, great. I mean, genuinely great. I'll be delighted for people to go, I hate all of this stuff, it's rubbish. That's fine, because that's what good art does. It provokes conversation. And I think the conversation about prayer is not at the forefront in this nation, and I believe it needs to be.
Thank you. Does anyone else amongst the journalists, any other journalists have a question? Andrew or Chris?
Hello?
Yes, Andrew, go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, I was very struck by by your definition of answered prayer as including those prayers that are answered with no. There's a very famous Onion headline, God answers prayers of paralyzed child, God says no. This isn't what most people mean by an answer to prayer. They ask for something, they don't get it. Are you going to... I mean, this could be a monument with 500,000 bricks devoted to atheists saying, well, I asked and it didn't work.
Well, Jesus prayed and God said no to Jesus, didn't he? So
not for very long.
Well,
can I give a lovely example, Richard? Can I just give an example that comes to mind? One of my favourite stories of prayer is from Amy Carmichael, who's was a wonderful missionary in South India. I had the privilege of going to her orphanage. When she was a little girl, she prayed, Lord, may I have blue eyes? And in the morning, wonderful young faith, she ran to the mirror and the brown eyes were still there. And she wept. And she asked her mum, God hasn't answered my prayer. What on earth's going on? About 10, 15 years later, it dawned on her that her entire life's work depended on her having brown eyes. Because she couldn't get into the orphanage, she couldn't get into the temples and liberate the children who were in prostitution unless she appeared under a sari to be an Indian lady. And she testified many years later that effectively her whole life's work depended on that answer being no. Because the real heart of her answer, or her real heart, was, I believe in this God and I'm prepared to run to the mirror and I expect him to answer. An adult interpretation was much more sophisticated and complex. And I've always loved that story because
I think, sorry, Paul, I think the point is we are trying to create a conversation, and it's great that we grapple with these subjects. I do believe that sometimes God says no. I believe that God listens to every single prayer, but this is what we want to. So the next question is, well, why does he answer no? And that's a massive conversation that we can't even cover within an hour's conversation here. But that's what we hope to do. You know, there was 5 Live this week did a phone in talking about prayer. Fantastic. That's what we're trying. That's what we're trying to achieve.
I just to come back at you, there's something in the chat box here, Richard, about this being avowedly Christian and not multi-faith, because does that mean that you don't regard that people from other faiths who pray, maybe they're doing it differently to people who are Christians who pray, maybe the value of it is different, lesser perhaps in some way, maybe it's not praying? What do you think about that?
I wouldn't really. I'm not really making a value judgment on that at all. Obviously, there are within the different faiths there are different paradigms. Not every faith believes in the concept of prayer being answered. and there are better people to talk on that. I'm not making a value judgment on that. All I'm doing is presenting a piece of art which contains prayers that are of a Christian nature.
Sophia, I know you're on the call, but I wonder if this is a question that you want to ask in person to everyone. Are you saying that protecting is something about Christian heritage and inclusive and open conversations? I don't know if you'd like to make your point in person.
Yeah, I think I'm just intrigued as to what the focus of this project is. If the focus is to have to really bring the role of religion in the public sphere to light and to manifest it, and to start a conversation around prayer and spirituality, which is something that all faiths and those who are not of faith engage in, then I'm just intrigued as to why the balance has come down on the side of, oh, you know, it's Christian prayer that we're going to be mainly showcasing. I wonder if then what's happened is that we've said we want to have the conversation about prayer, but actually, you know, when it comes down to it, we kind of think protecting this heritage and showcasing this heritage is somehow more important than having this open conversation, than allowing it to be accessible. And I don't know, I think there's something that just is unsettling to me about that, about the prioritization being the kind of Christian definition of prayer and answered prayer over actually just learning with others, collaborating with others, and asking the question of everyone, not just Christians, of the whole believing and non-believing public, what is the role of religion in society? I just wonder how that encourages an agenda of social cohesion, and how it is meant to bring people together. It seems to be fundamentally a bit divisive.
I don't think that's easy to answer, because I think other faith leaders should have the freedom to express their faith how they see fit, and some faith leaders will engage with this. We shouldn't criticize them for doing that, and we'll give them the opportunity to say what they believe, and give them a good opportunity to do that. Some may choose not to. I think society is free. You know, if another faith decide to build, I don't know, whatever they want to build that expresses an element of their faith, would I oppose that? I'd be like, no, that's great. Let's have the conversation. I'm not going to apologize for being a Christian, and I'm not going to apologize for wanting to share what I believe and what many hundreds of thousands of Christians believe in this country.
Thank you. Can we go to Amanda Hancock's next, please?
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question about how you decide which prayers go onto the wall, and whether there'll be any. I mean, obviously you've mentioned that some prayers are not answered going on the wall, but what about? I mean, what are your criteria in terms? Because you'll probably get many more prayers than you'll be able to put on the wall. So how do you decide which ones you're going to reject?
Yeah, great question. Obviously many are subjective. I mean, we had one the other day from a guy who said that he'd prayed and God had given him a singing voice. And, you know, I've watched enough of the X Factor to know that not everybody who thinks they've got a singing voice has necessarily got one. But it is a piece of art and it's subjective. However, you know, what we are now the volumes are coming in, what we will be doing is trying to pull together some experts across the broad church to look at some of those that we think I'm not sure, but as long as they've got a credibility to them, the vast majority we will put on, and let people decide. You know, there are some that I read personally, and I just think, well, you know, that's nice. I'm not sure I'd categorize that, but how should I judge the impact that has had on that person? And the impact is not the answer prayer, the impact is on their journey of understanding who God is. And I think it's very difficult for anyone to give that a tick or a cross. But clearly there are some areas that you would not want to be on there, and we've already sort of touched on stuff that would be highly offensive.
Do you want to come back, Amanda?
Well, I'm just, in some ways, no, obviously it's a complete nightmare to decide which prayers you're going to include and which you're not, because obviously they're all people's own expressions of their own faith and their relationship with God. And I mean, obviously, if you reject someone's prayer, then they could be highly offended by that, because that's their relationship. I do also think about the project in general. I know lots of people have been going on about the whole multiplace aspect of it. Because we're in a predominantly Christian country, just about, one could argue that, yes, let's have that, some sort of massive thing like this. But if it was to be a Muslim or a Hindu prayer wall that people wanted to set up, would that not get a lot of heat in terms of people not wanting that to happen? And that's why I feel slightly uneasy that this is not a sort of multi-faith thing, because I think actually all faiths in this very secular country that we live in now almost need to come together and show some demonstration of we're here and, this is all valid and it works. Sorry, it's a bit rambling.
That's okay. I mean, that's an approach, isn't it? I mean, I do find it. I do find it interesting that we have different values on religion than other areas of life, and so often people, there are some that every time any faith raises their sort of their voice, then people want that to be a merged approach amongst all faiths, and I think there's some really good charities that are doing work with faiths, trying to encourage them to say what they believe and not sort of dumb it down to try and get everybody involved. And I just don't think that's a healthy debate is good. I'm really want to encourage other faiths to be bold and strong and say what they believe. I think that's good for us as a nation.
Do you think that the process of prayer is the same for a Christian as a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist?
I don't know. And that's, you'll be able to find better people that can answer those questions. But
if supposing a Muslim were to say in their prayers, ask for guidance, ask for comfort, ask for support, is that the same process as a Christian asking for comfort and support?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I can't answer what the experience is like for a Muslim. I think it would be good to ask a Muslim leader, and wouldn't that be great, by the way? Ask a Muslim leader, what are your views on prayer, and how is it for you? And then ask some Christian leaders what it's like for them, and ask some Buddhist leaders, and then discuss it. For me, I'm sharing what it's like for the Christian experience.
There's a question here from Christopher, who couldn't unfortunately be heard properly on his mic. Does this site suggest that mainstream churches have failed to engage this culture in prayer? And if so, why?
I think all the churches, there's such a wide range of what the church does. We are trying to communicate in a way for the visual age of the 21st century. That's what we're trying to do. We live in a visual age. So the church is getting behind this. So I don't think we can particularly say the church has failed, because the church is actually we have hundreds of churches that are involved in this project. So.
Right, thank you. Andrew, you've got another question, which I think probably should be the last as we draw the session to a close.
Let me unmute myself. I think this is the question I intended to ask. I'm just puzzled by the problem of, as it were, moderating 1 million stories of answered prayers. We have enough problem moderating stuff on social media. If you're going to get these million stories for your bricks, you said you won't have anything offensive. I don't know what the definition of hate in these things are. If someone were to pray for the conversion of the Jews or to give thanks that they were no longer gay or something, I don't know if you'd put it up. But more to the point, I'm interested in the idea of fact-checking, as it were. One sees an awful lot of claims of miracles and so on, which appear to be entirely false. Is there going to be any kind of winnowing process, any kind of checking process?
That is just not to go through a checking process with 1 million stories. We would not have the resource to this, and that's why I do want to remind you, we're producing a piece of art, and so we are producing a piece of art for people to look at and make their own decisions. And will there be some stories that are untrue on there? I hope not, but that may be the case. But then I'm going to trust in the reader. I'm going to trust in the visitor that they can go through and go, well, not sure about that one. Let me read another one. There's 1 million. So we're trying to produce a national conversation that will discuss, does God answer prayer? And I can't and won't try and police that.
Well, unless there are any other questions, I think I just want to say thank you very much to Richard and to Paul and to Michelle for joining us for the call, and to all of the journalists on it for asking the questions. There'll be a report on our website on what happened, and the film will go up on YouTube a little later today or early tomorrow morning. So we'll watch what happens next with interest. Richard, will you let us know when the first brick is placed?
We absolutely will. Thank you very much for your questions, and I do realise, some of those are difficult questions. Some of them we're wrestling with, and we need to get better answers perhaps on some of them. But this is a process, and I hope when we get to the end of it, we'll produce something that the nation will be proud of.